Hello guys, it's Miss Martin. I promised you all that I would have a lecture coming your way over Trifles by Susan Glaspell, and here it is. I would like for you all, I will have a spot in Moodle to include notes that you jot down while you're observing this video. So my suggestion to you would probably be to have this video up in one screen and then minimize and type as you go, or take down some notes, and you're more than welcome to use the app on your phones. It's called Microsoft Lens. If you prefer to create notes by writing them down, and then just send me a scan of the notes. Again, the application is called Microsoft Lens, Lens, I think. And you just download that, and then basically it turns the picture that you take of your notes into a scan. So either of those options work for me. Just show that you were following along and taking notes on this as you went. So let's begin. Maybe. There we go. Trifles. So trifles are things that have no value. To Susan Glaspell, this word signified the feelings men in the farming areas of the Midwest often had about their women. So believing that, you know, women stayed at home, they cleaned the house, they took care of the children, they cooked, and that it was really pretty much something that anybody could do. It's not that big of a deal. You know, you might concern yourself with quilting or knitting or all of these useless quote unquote things. And you know, Susan Glaspell, sort of some early feminist theory here, was noticing that this was wrong. It was not right of men to be thinking of women in this way. And so she created this drama in order to exemplify the error in that way of thinking. So in the story, the women's lives are limited, and the theme of her drama was, the entire drama, was written in 1916. It was produced for private subscribers using elements of history, class, culture, gender, and archetypes to prove to her audience the plight of these women. So again, this would have not necessarily been something that would have been widely accepted at the time, so it was for private subscribers and audiences. Glaspell was raised in the Midwest, much like us. She knew firsthand how the farm women lived in their lonely, colorless, and isolated world, especially those that had no children. And that was something that was particularly looked down upon at the time. You would have viewed a woman's importance very much on the fact that she was able to bear children, and Glaspell, had some problems with that concept. Her work explored the lives of these women in the non-commercial New Province theater, where the dramas she wrote dealt with real life, unlike that of traditional theater. So rather than being very fictionalized, this focuses on a realistic point of view of life. It was written very quickly. She said about her play that it would be performed at the theater, and I don't know how to write a play. I have never studied it. It was presented in 1916, and the conflict enacted concerns the values men placed on women in this play. The women's response to it as they lived their hard lives on the prairies of the Midwest. So this is kind of just a reiteration of what I mentioned to you guys earlier. Additional context, the writer depicts the farmhouse where the play takes place in the first scene. A gloomy kitchen and left without having been put in order, unwashed pans. Mrs. Hale says they stayed away because it was not cheerful. Most telling is the way the men talk to and about the women in this story. It's really obviously exemplifies the themes and ideas that Glaspell was trying to portray. The men say things like, Mrs. Hale says, I'd hate to have men coming into my kitchen, snooping around and criticizing. The county attorney says Mrs. Wright should have more on her mind than preserves. So, oh gosh, all you can think about is preserves, you and your silly lady brain. Mr. Hale responds with, well, women are used to worrying over trifles. So basically, well, all women just care about things that don't matter, duh. And so it's the way that the men and their dialogue is utilized that shows the point that Glaspell's trying to make. They are obviously looking at the women like they're stupid, they care about things that don't matter, blah, blah, blah. Mrs. Wright says Minnie was once a pretty lively young woman who liked to sing, but the culture she lived in stole it from her. So she's described as being one way, and she's very much changed because of the society that she's living in the Midwest and on the prairie. Living on the prairie with few pleasures in life drained the joy of her much as it did the other women, so she was no longer that person that she used to be. Mrs. Hale says, we all know the same kinds of things as women, but we don't talk about them. I should have visited her more. And so we see with Mrs. Hale and the other women in the story, camaraderie. They know what it's like to be looked down upon or treated unfairly or to lose their sense of self. And they regret that they weren't able to visit her more. And then on page 1118 of the drama. I think that that's the correct page number. I know I made this last year. But Mrs. Hale says, no children make less work, but it makes a quiet house and right out to work all day and no company when she did come in. And so again, we see this idea that, children were made out to be something that was very important to being a woman. And it's true, it is a little bit less work for somebody, but it would definitely be a quiet existence. And when your husband's gone all day, no children, it would have been lonely, is essentially what she's saying. Mrs. Peters says she knows what stillness is because she lost a baby once when it was 2 years old. So we see gender and the differences that come with gender, binary gender, that is. In fact, because the men think that Minnie is frail and in the case only interested in preserves, how could she have been cunning or had the cunning and the passion to kill a man? They think that a woman literally would not be able to think of such a thing. The women enter the drama after the men walk in, signifying their lesser importance, and the men leave the kitchen because it only has kitchen things that would not be interesting to a man. While they are at first suspicious that Minnie did not hear her husband being strangled, they can't find any evidence that she killed him, and besides, she's only a lady. She couldn't do something like that. Trifles is an archetype of many pieces of literature. An archetype is a typical character, an action, or a situation that seems to represent universal patterns of human nature. Men are frequently described and shown as the individuals in charge, yet it is often the women who seem to be powerless who take away the male power and get what they want. 1,000 ships were launched from Helen of Troy, and Macbeth turns to murder to please his wife. These are all examples within literature of that type of archetype, in which we have this reversal of roles within the genders. This farm wife, who is described as a bird and is described as pleating her apron over and over again, got what she wanted: revenge for the loss, not just of the bird, but her own life. So some symbols. The first one, cherry preserves. The men have no understanding of how hard it is to can something. They don't understand the beauty of the fruit and that it was once a colorful thing in Minnie's dull, dreary life. So they see it as something simplistic and ridiculous that you would really, or only a woman would spend their time on, but it's actually a very difficult task. I'm not sure if any of you have ever done it. I know that I haven't, and I would not even know where to begin. The second symbol is the apron. Farm women always wore aprons. They used them to cover their dresses, and few had many more than one or two dresses, so they needed to be cared for. The apron would protect it. So it symbolizes their role in the family, the one who prepared the food, or the mother, someone who would always be getting dirty, doing household things, either cleaning, cooking, taking care of children. If you didn't have a lot of dresses and you wanted to keep them clean, you would wear an apron. And all of those duties that were expected of women are something that you would probably get dirty doing. And so it's kind of essentially like the uniform of that type of woman. The idea of folding and pleating her apron. Minnie is described after the murder as sitting in her rocking chair, pleating and repeating her apron. This is a symbol of her timidness, or maybe even a lack of mentality. So she could be doing this over and over again because she obviously probably, if she is participating in murder, has potentially is struggling with some mental illness of some sort, so you might do something over and over again to cope. But also the men interpret it as her being very innocent or timid or scared. She was kind of like a bird herself, real sweet and pretty, timid and fluttery. My, how she changed. So the canary is another symbol. The pressure of life had taken its toll on Minnie. She is repeatedly described as small and frail, like a bird that doesn't sing. The bird sang and was colorful. It means something to make her life meaningful, and her husband killed it. So that bird was kind of an example of who she used to be. She used to be someone who was bright and who sang, and then the bird was exactly that. And when her husband killed it, he wasn't just killing the bird, that was something special to her, but symbolically he was killing who she used to be. And that was something he had been doing throughout their entire marriage. Quilting versus knotting. One of the trifles in the play is whether or not Mrs. Wright was going to quilt or not the quilt she was working on. And in the case for many of the trifles in this play, the question is more significant than it seems. The final stage of quilting is to attach the top batting and backing together. So you've got the two pieces and you put them together in order to finish the quilt. And you have to sew them together. This can be done in two ways. One way, quilting, is to sew elaborate patterns into it. So if you all have ever seen a quilt, there might be like flowers sewed into it or diamond shapes, but you'll see, along with the pieces that are stitched together, a back pattern that is designed within the stitching over it. But the simpler and just as effective way is knotting, or to sew a heavy thread through the pieces using larger stitches and then cut the thread and knots in it. So having something just kind of tying it together versus having a very intricate design that adds to the complexity of the quilt to put the two pieces together. More symbols. The cat. The woman discusses the possibility of the cat killing the bird. Mrs. Hale says, many did not like cats. The connotation is that women are like cats. They can kill and leave. So we have an example here of knotting. Patchwork quilts were what farm women did to show some creativity. They cut up old clothes to make quilts with them. They either sewed them together, called quilting, or knotted them together, called knotting. The knotting symbolizes the murder weapon, the noose which had to be knotted. So here are a couple questions now that we're done with the lecture that I want you all to consider, and I will include these on Moodle. What is this play doing with concepts of law and justice? Many critics have thought that the women's actions in the play point to a disconnect between the letter of the law and law's ability to give many right a fair trial. And additionally, taking into account what you know about the historical circumstances of the play, do you think Mrs. Hale and Mrs. Peters did the right thing? Alrighty guys, that's all I have on there. I will have some additional activities and other homework for you posted soon. I'm going to work on that now. I miss you guys, and yeah.